But we're going to welcome back a gentleman that was with us earlier today. Sam Riehn is going to be up top and handle our next panel. Welcome. Take it away, my friend. It's yours.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you again. And man, what a day of great talks. But I think I've got the best panel of the day. I have the pleasure of introducing three gentlemen here. And guys, why don't I do this? I'll go through all your introductions, and I'll give you an opportunity to talk about what you're up to and what you care about. And then we'll dive right into the questions. I'll ask a few, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. I look forward to seeing some questions in the Q&A. So Rupak, are you on? Oh, there you are. Hey, good to see you.
Good seeing you.
He had started, I'll start with you. You've had over 20 years at NASA, starting as a senior computer scientist and working your way up to branch chief of the computer science research branch, and then serving 7 years in the advanced supercomputing division. So you're on the perfect panel to be talking today. And where you finished as division chief, and you are now the director of exploration tech at NASA Ames. Am I saying that right? Ames Research Center. Ames. Thank you. And then Michael Dickey, a University of Colorado Boulder grad, 87 class. We're big rivals down at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, but that's okay. You're your brother because you did your time in the Air Force, but you also got your master's from CU Boulder, as well as a master's from the Air War College. Like I said, Michael is an Air Force veteran, serving in the ballistic missile defense, Air Force Flight Test Center, Space Command, Science and Technology Integration. You served in the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then moved to the Sierra Nevada Corporation as their Director of Spacecraft Strategy, and then back to the Air Force Space Command as Chief Architect. And you are now the president of Inflection Space Strategy. So that's awesome, quite a career. And then, of course, Mr. JD Enright, the man who needs no introductions, mainly because you've been on 3 times today, but also because, of course, you're the CEO of TMG Core, who is the world's most innovative 2-phase liquid immersion cooling technology and redefining high-density data centers and enabling high-performance computing on the edge. So thank you all so much for being here today. And Michael, I want to start with you. Why don't you tell us about what you're doing at Inflection and what you care about today and what you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sam, and thanks. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Thank you.
Thanks to David Hamilton and America's Future Series for holding these events. I think some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I think you've heard brought up throughout the course of the day, which is good. I think alignment in vision and alignment in where we need to go is important. But where I come from, I feel really old because I have a long bio. And what I'm doing now is I've left the Space Force after a little gig being a highly qualified expert like Nick Chalin was and Preston Dunlap is. My time was up. It was time to go. But I'm trying to continue to push from a national security perspective this convergence of commercial and national security, and that's come up a number of times today. This whole space renaissance is pretty exciting, but it is complicated because it spans borders, it spans public and private interests, and from where I come from, it has a lot of national security implications as well. So we're seeing a lot of competition in space, and we see that both in sort of the traditional good American capitalism sense, but also in a more sobering potential for troublemaking that Lonnie just kind of talked about a little bit. So this panel is about data and big data. I would suggest that data, from my perspective, is just a tool. It's a tool for information, and it's a tool for information advantage, which is really why we went to space in the first place, right? So we had, there was an iron curtain around our single geopolitical competitor, the Soviet Union. And apologies to those of you born since 1991. You can Google Soviet Union, Iron Curtain, learn a little bit about it. But the Soviets were developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles to be able to deliver them. And yes, we had an apeshit moment. And we wanted to understand their capabilities. And we sort of needed this informational advantage. So the way we did it back then is only very generously thought of as little data, wee data, right? We built satellites. The satellites would take pictures by exposing film on board. Some days later, they would drop the film in a bucket off the satellite and re-enter it over the Pacific. We'd snag it out of the air by airplanes, and we'd land and we'd deliver that film to a lab where it could be developed and analyzed by a team of humans, photo interpreters, who'd attempt to make sense of these literally snapshots in time of grainy images, a lot of times grainy images of clouds that were over the top of where we were hoping to take pictures. Then they'd type up their findings, they'd put them on another airplane, they'd fly them from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. So the data was the information that was on the film from weeks ago, but it wasn't information until it got in the hands of decision makers. That was maybe weeks, days at least, a lot of times weeks later. So a lot of things in there you can Google too, film, typewriters. If you actually look up the last bucket catch on YouTube, there's a really cool video about how all this happened. But fast forward to today, and this is still why we are in space, largely is for information advantage. America's military forces have been superior since the dawn of the space age because we had access to data. We had more data, we had better data, we had faster data than the other side. And now we image the planet in high definition video. We listen to the planet across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. We probe the atmosphere of the planet. All of these we do for national security purposes and now for commercial purposes as well. And the scale and the speed at which we're collecting and trying to move information is staggering, right? So if you think out to Ames, where Rupak's from, there's a company startup called Planet, not really a startup anymore, they're legit. They're collecting about 40 terabytes of information a day about the planet. Maxar had some higher resolution systems, 80 terabytes per day. So the scale of the data is bigger and time is accelerating as well. So satellites that watch the planet for national security purposes, like watching for missile launches, that like to happen with China that was just talked about. That data that's collected has to be turned into actionable information in seconds, not in days, not in weeks, but in seconds. And so there's no way that can be a manual endeavor anymore. God bless the photo interpreters, but we have to now rely on machines to do this work. We have to have them move and process and make sense of these staggering amounts of data to be able to maintain an informational advantage. And it's in a world where that data is more and more accessible to the competition. So whether that's national security or economics or commerce, that's great, but everybody's got access to it. So being able to process it and then make decisions faster is the advantage we need. So I'll close my monologue here by saying, but wait, it gets worse, right? Everything I just talked about was focused on the planet for trying to find and defend against nefarious activities that are on the planet. But now the space domain itself, as we've talked about, can harbor nefarious activities as well by the likes of China and Russia that you've again seen in the news. And the volume of space that exists between the surface of the planet and the lunar orbit is equivalent to 300,000 planet Earths. That's a huge amount of volume to surveil and turn data into information advantage. And that's what we're up against. And of course, I realize that I'm sharing the virtual stage here with Rupak, whose job is to explore the universe. So this cute little cul-de-sac where the Earth-Moon system is cute. But he's got an even bigger problem, and I'm interested to his perspective and to JD's perspective on how we're going to solve it. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rupak. That was a great transition to talk about the Ames Center and what you care about there.
Well, thanks again. Thanks, Sam, for hosting this. Also, thanks to David Hamilton and the America's Future series for inviting me here. So let me talk a little bit from a different perspective. So first of all, I'm with NASA. I'm even wearing my NASA shirt here. NASA is a civilian agency. So obviously, our perspective of space is different from the military's perspective. And it was interesting to hear some of the comments that, Dr. Cass made earlier, just before us. In space, from our perspective, from a NASA perspective, it's all about collaboration. If you look at the missions that NASA is focused on, one big area is aeronautics. So in aeronautics, it is all about national priorities. We want to make sure that the United States is ahead of everyone else in terms of aeronautics. But if you look at the other two areas, which are science, maybe earth science, space science and you're looking about space exploration, it's all about collaboration. And that is why, even after all the challenges we have had with Russia over the years, we continue to work with them on the International Space Station. In fact, when we retired the shuttle, Russians, obviously, after paying them a lot of money, they were transporting our astronauts to the station until SpaceX and other companies came around. So in space, for us, it's all about collaboration. Now, like we just heard from Michael, getting a lot of data is not the problem. With the advances in IT technologies, you can generate a lot of data. Think about how many Twitter feeds and Instagram and everything else is going on. So generating data is not a problem. And with fast IT devices. And then if you have a lot of sensors, we're talking about this large volume of space that we have, we also have a lot of observational data sets. So we have observational data sets, we have computational data sets. The question is, what information or knowledge are you going to get out of the data? And just like Michael rightly pointed out, this is now you need other computers to process the data to get information out of the data. So now we are creating almost like an endless loop. We are using computers to generate more data, and now we want information or knowledge out of the data. Some of the data, like in the military context, might be really time critical. If you cannot analyze the data within a certain period of time, that data is useless. You might as well throw it away. There's no value. Some other areas where NASA is interested in, it doesn't really matter. If you're trying to find out if there is a planet out there in the habitable zone, we don't have to find it out today. We can find it out tomorrow. It's still fine. It'll still be good to know where did we come from? How did the Big Bang happen? And all of that is interesting. So for us also, we have a spectrum of data that are perishable in some sense, that the data is no longer useful versus data that you have. And then I'll just add another thing that we want to talk about that is also interesting. We are talking about data, but all data is not equivalent. So for example, when we within NASA talk about data, we have data which are ones and zeros, okay? That could be data, but we also have engineering drawings, for example, of the Apollo era. That's also data. We have a variety of data, and sometimes integrating that data is important also and becomes difficult. Because if I have a computer program that is generating data, I have some observational data sets that is giving me some raw feed, versus I have some engineering drawings or CAD designs that are also data. And because that is one of the biggest challenges that we as a country have faced with terrorism and other things, is that there is a lot of data, but the data is compartmentalized and not really shared so that you can get a lot of information out of that. So I think that's another aspect of how do you deal with these large volumes of data. So it's an interesting area to look at, and obviously it brings in things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, but also quantum, for example, because can you use quantum technologies to get more information out of the data? So I'll stop there, and then we'll see what JD has to say and to solve all of these problems, and then we'll come back. Thanks again.
Wow, Rupert, thanks a lot. Put all that on my shoulders. First of all, let me just say I'm so pleased to be here. It's been an incredible day. Michael, Rupak, I feel humbled to be on a panel with you guys. So the question, the discussion here is, well, what I understand is very, very big data. Tomorrow will be very, very, very big data. Because it certainly isn't going down when we think about Moore's law and the exponentiality of compute. And quite frankly, we have an ape that is constipated. That we're about to have this ape shit moment, and it's happening. So the way I think about it, the way TMG Core thinks about it is, we focus on only high performance computing. We don't look at the standard computing storage applications. We think about things from, what is the next generation? What was yesterday's high performance computing is today's, what we call standard computing. And today's high performance computing will be standard computing tomorrow. So we're developing technologies that are going to be high performance computing in the next 20 years. And so we develop a technology to do that. Now, so we think of it in 5 different categories. One is, mission specific. So where is it going? Is it terrestrial? Is it celestial? Is it LEO? Is it airborne? Is it, where is it going? Geographic locations is right now, as we know, thermal concerns for computing applications. Machines don't like heat in general. So we solve some of those problems. So that's the first thing. The second thing was we think about collection and processing, right? So latency, right? Speed. I heard both you, Michael, and Rupak talk about the importance of, in some instances, to your point, Rupak, it can be a 24-hour period. Now, you always want to get data faster. We all are data hungry, and the faster we can get that satisfaction, the better. However, it's not critical necessarily to some of your missions. Some of your other missions, I suspect, Rupak, are critical. And you get delays in communications and data feeds and telemetry. That's key. Whereas, Michael, you referenced, especially in the military applications and national security, you've got to get that, you've got to collect that data, and then you've got to be able to process that data and get something valuable out of it so that humans can make decisions that affect boys and girls' lives in the field, or just general decisions, political, geopolitical, or otherwise. So that's the second thing. The third thing is it structured data or is it unstructured data? That's a big difference, because we collect a lot of unstructured data all the time. It's the ocean of things. You've got everybody's devices, you've got smart homes, you've got autonomous driving vehicles, or the attempt of autonomous driving vehicles. You've got all of these instruments pulling information, data, as you mentioned. And then what about the structured data? And how do you turn that unstructured data into structured data and aggregate it and to actually get information out? And then fourthly, access to that final data. And the security associated with accessing that. That's a key thing that we think about as well. It's not enough to have something that can be mission specific. For example, we think about things in a decentralized manner. The world today has been for many, you hear about edge computing now, or even, edge-based rockets that go decentralized. When we had the conversation with Ben earlier, the idea of having centralized massive data collection and processing is a national security risk, because you have 5 or 6 locations across the United States, if we're talking U.S. national security, where if any one of those are, cyber attack or physical attack, we have a major national security problem, our electrical grid and otherwise. So the idea of getting a decentralized distributed nodal network that allows for better security, faster access to data collection, as well as data processing in a more secure fashion, where bad actors can't necessarily take down one specific node and the entire system falls down, where we can protect against that. Because we know as SolarWinds was, remember SolarWinds not that long ago, we've had a lot of issues. And so we have to have that. So there's access and security. And then finally, there's cost and sustainability. When you're taking all of that data, there's a cost associated with collecting data. There's a cost associated with processing the data. And then how does it get disseminated out? And then the security structure that goes around that. So, and then how does that fall into sustainability? What we know is these massive data centers, they consume billions of gallons of water on an annualized basis. They use massive amounts of carbon footprints, and there's all kinds of concrete and all the steel and all the things that go along with that. And you can't put those in the middle of an urban area, urban area or even a suburban area cost effectively. So how do you do that? So when I think of how do we as CMG Core think of things? I mean, this big data, that's right in our wheelhouse. For the first time today, I feel like this is in my wheelhouse. I've been just in awe of all of the other things, inclusive of you folks in your space acumen. When it comes to data and the processing of data and the mission specifics and structural versus unstructured, access and security, cost and sustainability, that's where we come in. And how do we solve that? We solve that by collaborating with people like yourself, Michael, and you, Rupak, at NASA, and the other folks that we talked about with today, and being able to bring our speed to market, our novel technology to those applications, so that we can allow for a decentralized nodal network. We can allow for near zero latency with micro hyperscale data centers. We have something the size of, it's about 12 square feet, and it's 120 kilowatts of high performance computing. We have single blade servers that are over 7,000 watts in a single 1U blade server. It's the most powerful server, and we can do hexabytes of computing in something the size of your garage. You know, recently China just came out in the last couple of days, with stating that they've got the world's most powerful supercomputer. Well, what they don't know is that the apeshit factor kicked in last couple of years, and we're already down that road. And the technology that companies like myself, like TMG Core, is developing, can literally has unlimited scalability to support NASA, to support other applications, to create supercomputing anywhere. There's no limitations without having the economic and sustainability concerns that other nations may have.
Yeah, and JD, that's a great point. I just wanted to add just a couple of things there. One is, the one aspect is the hardware itself, and I think you guys are really doing an awesome job coming up with that. But there are two other aspects of it. One, we have to also remember, we are talking about data, but there is also this concept called metadata, which you also know, because, and we face this all the time, right? We get an email from someone, and I have 20 folders. Where do I put that email? Do I put it in the folder where this mail came from, or whether I should put it in the folder where this is about this mail? And today I have a really great planning strategy how to put it, but next week I cannot find this stupid email anymore because today I'm now thinking a different way and I cannot find. So metadata is another huge thing, and we have seen that when sometimes metadata becomes even more problematic than the data itself because you can't file anything. So a lot of people like myself and others maybe put all the email in your inbox and just keep everything there, and you're just going to search for it based on what you want to look for, but that's not a scalable solution. So that's one point I think we should not forget about the metadata aspect. Exactly. And then the other thing is, what are the algorithms that we're actually running on the hardware? Because the hardware will only get you so far. And we know Moore's law and maybe quantum and other things, and advances in cooling technologies and cache hierarchies and multi-core and FPGAs will going to get you there. But ultimately, another factor of improvement has to come from what kind of algorithms are you running on these systems to be able to do that. I just wanted to add those 2 points.
No, it's a very good point. In fact, you mentioned a number of things. When we first started our technology development in our labs, we're actually in Dallas right now, just north of Dallas in Plano. And you guys are welcome. I'd love to host you guys up here to see some of the most incredible computing you've ever seen. When we first started this, we were using ASICs chips. We were using 12 nanometer ASICs chips because they do one thing really well, and that just happened to be the SHA-256 algorithm. Basically Bitcoin mining. And we weren't doing it because we're Bitcoin miners. We were doing it because those ASICs chips, one, we could get a lot of them, and we could put a lot of those 12 nanometer chips on a single blade, on a single surface, and push the limits of the power and the thermal applications and the TDPs to really show that this technology, this American technology, is viable. And so I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. We have to do better. We have to develop the software stacks, the things that go on to the hardware have to be continuously improved, but you need the hardware to be able to do that. And so that's where acceleration comes in, and that's where, and it all gets down to the thermal issues as well. But yeah, absolutely.
I want to bring it back to Michael. Sir, you talked about the intermingling of security and commercial interest in the quest for information advantage. How do you see the interrelationship, if any, between defense and commercial solutions to these shared challenges?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started talking about it right here. Is that commercial technology, right? All this IT technology is moving fast, not because of government requirements, because of a lot of other requirements. And opportunities in the commercial. So it's really a strategic imperative, I think, that we match the commercial to national security, and for a couple of reasons in space, right? The first would be, of course, our government and America should want to be the nexus of this commercial space economy and want to have that rooted in the United States. Right? Our country's biggest strength is the strength of our economy. And the space economy is going to be north of $1 trillion a year in a couple of decades. So we need to nurture everything it takes to create that economy, right? Smart policies, workforce, we've talked about today, everything that goes along with it. But kind of more pragmatically, why we need to partner with this commercial environment is because the commercial world is out innovating the Department of Defense. And they're doing it in the very technologies that are necessary to sustain the information advantage that I talked about. So, persistent sensing, the ability to move and process data at scale to create information. Why is this true? Why do they out innovate what used to be the R&D hub of the United States, right? First, they have more money. So, it's hard to nail down exact numbers, but Morgan Stanley, heard a talk a couple of weeks ago, measured about $17 billion of private capital that came into this sector over the last 24 months. And that doesn't count stuff that's not really public disclosed. So the fiscal year 2022 budget request for the United States Space Force is $17.4 billion. So basically you have a Space Force worth of investment coming into this area commercially in exactly the right technologies. So, I guess as an aside, we could talk about the fact that the Space Force budget is 2.5% of the DoD budget. And is that the right amount to invest when we need the global information advantage? I don't know, another America's Future Series discussion perhaps. But so they've got money and they move faster. So the defense budget is the 19th largest economy on the planet and is put together by a central planning bureaucracy, right? It takes time. And somebody else mentioned this earlier today too. So the FY22 budget that I mentioned was developed 2 years ago. And if you kind of notice, there was no United States Space Force 2 years ago. So it's very hard to rapidly identify opportunities and to deploy capital where it's going to make the most effect and to accelerate your ability to make decisions. So yeah, we have to partner with commercial in these IT technologies and the other space technologies. We get a 2-to-1 financial leverage and we go faster, right? Sign me up.
Thank you. Rupak, you mentioned algorithms earlier, but and how software certainly plays an aspect, and there's the hardware element. I think there's a third element here that's like the network. So if I have someone in orbit, I have all the Johnson Space Center ready to support them, but what do I do about folks on Mars?
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned that's a very important point also in terms of networks. Not only, so even before I go into space, even on Earth, for example, if you think about hardware, and I know innovations are being made. Now, you do want some duplication of the hardware for resiliency and for other reasons. But on the other hand, hardware is going to become expensive and it is difficult for all the other reasons, also because of IT security and physical security. You're not going to be able to replicate it everywhere. So therefore, if you have a small number, and it's always going to be small, we can argue whether it's tens or hundreds, but the point is the number of users of those systems are obviously going to be orders of magnitude larger than the number of installations of the hardware that we have. And so even networking, terrestrial networking is going to be important. There's no point having these really massive systems that are capable of doing a lot of things and having really smart subject matter experts who know everything about what to do with it. And then you have these really thin straws that connect the data with the people. This is not going to work. So there has to be a real investment also in networking infrastructure. You must be able to get to several orders of magnitude faster networks. Now, again, going back to your question specifically about NASA, for example, that raises another challenge when you're doing deep space. And I've used the term edge computing in a different way, where NASA needs to make decisions, in situ decisions that are in deep space. So unlike many of the other things that we do at NASA, or maybe in the DoD, for example, where after I've collected the data, I can throw exascale computing at it and try to solve that problem within a certain amount of time, I'm not going to be able to do that when I'm on Mars and other places. So that means not only do I have to collect the data, but be able to do some in situ processing, decision making. Again, it's not big data, it could be little data, but it's little data that I'm by myself with maybe an abacus or something, basically. That's what I'm stuck with now, right? So it's not a lot of data, but my tools are also limited. But I have to make some decisions. So the International Space Station is interesting. The Chinese having another station in low Earth orbit is interesting, because at the end of the day, I have 6 astronauts on station and I have an army on the ground who are supporting those 6 people on station. That's going to be completely different when I'm 2 people or 6 people on Mars, several million miles away, and they're on their own and they'll have to figure it out how to do it. So I think that raises another challenge for NASA in terms of data, is the processing of the data and what kind of tools will I have to be able to do that. They have to be radiation tolerant. They have to be able to do some decision making on the ground, if you will, wherever that ground is, without a back office support of having 10 exaflops running on Earth somewhere. So that raises another interesting challenge that we'll have to also do that.
That's another something to Google too, that abacus, for those of you born after the 3rd century, right?
Well, I think what you're alluding to is we need to be able to take our compute with us, and like you said, on the ground, they're computing on the edge. And I think JD, you might have something to say about computing on the edge.
Just a little, Sam, just a little. So, obviously we think a lot about computing. We think a lot about where it could go. One of the very first things I talked about today was mission specific. And the last thing we want is our brave young men and women, or old men and women for that matter, these days, it doesn't matter, in space doing work, whether it's the economy, the future economy in space, whether it's on the moon or whether it's at Mars or somewhere in between. I had some amazing conversations with Tony Bruno this morning, and he was talking about having folks actually working on meteors and asteroids, and not meteors, but asteroids, mining precious metals and living on the moon. And that just seems so amazing to me. And it means we need compute, because we're not going to be sitting there with abacus, to Rupak's point, expecting those guys to figure out, to calculate that. It just doesn't work. So we're thinking about that, and as part of our moving forward. So yes, having a decentralized, distributed nodal network in space, utilizing some of the technologies that we already have. And you mentioned radiation and EMP type applications. Some of the fluids that we're working on with companies like 3M and others are developing the latest dielectric fluids, and we're exploring those right now. We're exploring those things in our lab on what the capabilities are to be able to create a decentralized, distributed nodal network of micro data centers, literally in space, to connect the dots, to make sure that there's extremely low latency to get fast information, both structured and unstructured, large and small data, collected, processed as close to the eyeballs as needed, and so that they have the information in situ to make decisions.
Thank you. And then Michael, back to you, something you said before, and I'm not sure if it was on this call or our prep call, but you said private capital going into space is more than the entire Space Force budget. And you did talk about Space Force budget being, kind of dwarfed in comparison to the larger DoD, but what other barriers exist in adoption of commercially driven solutions to these challenges we're talking about?
Yeah, I think this panel, both of my mates here and other talks throughout the day have kind of talked about some of these things. So that the way this is going to work, especially if you're bringing in these commercial space technologies, is to build what we call hybrid architecture. So to be able to take commercial data and government generated data and put them together in ways that you can make sense of it. So that means that there's interoperability challenges, there's standards that are required. Space Development Agency, Derek was on earlier. They're trying to force folks into some standards that will help. This idea of variable trust and zero trust architectures that Nick Chalin brought up this morning, they're all key. But it does bring up this idea of security, and JD just talked about this, the fact that When you bring everything into a single centralized network, that might create vulnerability. So how do we do it with a distributed sort of a mesh network where you can create path diversity? So those are some of the key things. Those are technical things. One other one is just protection of data. You talk about big data. There's a lot of data that's in the wrong hands right now because they've come in and gone into supply chain and even government agencies and pulled it out. So data at rest and protection of that is important too. But I think probably the real thing that is a cultural change, and it'll be the hardest for the Department of Defense anyway to figure out, is a business model challenge, right? The ability to, again, deploy capital in more rapid ways that create win-win deals and allow you to accelerate, because we can centrally plan the economy, but by the time we build the thing that economy planned for, it's the wrong thing. And we have to be a lot more flexible and be able to follow the opportunities, again, like the commercial market does. And we need to have a sense of urgency about it.
Michael, just real quick, you mentioned resting data. I couldn't agree with you more. The vulnerability associated with resting data, just look at the social media aspects, the tech giants out there, all of that resting data, all of that analytics that they pull in, that's vulnerable. And fortunately, they have, I would say, relatively good firewalls and protection on that, more so actually than our U.S. government. And that some of those techniques and modalities need to be cross-referenced over, so that data isn't mined by people that we shouldn't be mining that data, which is why many of us don't actually use certain social medias as a result. But that resting data is a big deal. Yeah,
it is, and I think it's also, so we have to learn how to share data with one another. Either you don't necessarily just, here's everything about a particular program, even though you're working this part of it, right? Using roles and privileges and those sorts of things, those technologies for authentication and all that is going to take us a long way.
Yeah.
All right, now I'll turn it over to the crowd here. We've got some good questions. Rupak, I think this first one is aimed at you. Said, how will AI and machine learning change the way NASA uses big data?
Well, it is going to have a major role. Like I said, because of the vast amounts of data that we collect, and I can give very simple examples. For example, we have these satellites that are collecting images of various portions of the Earth for scientific purposes. And each of these images have a lot of information about them. For example, I may have images of the Gulf of Mexico at different times of the day, different times of the year, at different frequencies and all of that. And each of these images give me a lot of information. The question is, can I fuse all of those images to get more information? The problem is, well, how many of those images am I going to fuse? So suppose I have 1,000 images of the Gulf of Mexico. Do I need to fuse all 1,000 of them, or is it 5 of them? But think about the computational complexity of this, right? What is 5C1000? That's millions of combinations. And then once I fuse them, I don't even know what I'm looking for. It's actually harder than a needle in a haystack problem. A needle in a haystack problem is actually a simple problem, because I know I have a haystack, I have a needle, and I know what a needle looks like. So technically, I could have a needle on one hand, I can pick up one straw of hair at a time and say, hey, is this a needle or not? And if it is not, I throw it away. And I put 10,000 people on the stack and figure out, sooner or later, we'll know whether we have a needle in the haystack or not. This is harder than a needle in a haystack, because I actually don't know what I'm looking for. It may not actually even exist in that haystack. So it actually creates these challenges where you need technologies like AI and machine learning, and we have been also working on quantum enhanced machine learning, where can we throw in some of the features that come out of entanglement and superposition and tunneling, and use those technologies to actually kind of accelerate machine learning and be able to do certain things faster than a traditional system would be able to do. So yes, absolutely, AI and machine learning is critical to the kinds of things that we're doing.
I like your reference to quantum mechanics and predictability. I think being able to predict that is important. So we spend quite a bit of time talking about that for national security applications, as you can imagine, what we call always being behind the door. No matter where the enemy goes, we're already behind the door as a, and that's predictability, and that's quantum mechanics. Yeah.
We've mentioned Moore's Law a couple times today. JD, how do you see us keeping Moore's Law going? We talk about it as if it's always going to be up and to the right, but what is stopping it from plateauing, or is it plateauing, and what can we do to prevent it from plateauing?
So I don't want to assume everybody understands what Moore's Law is. So just Moore's Law, obviously, Dr. Moore, one of the founders or creators of Intel back in the 50s, came up with this idea. It's actually not a law. It's more of a philosophy, which has been proven. It was a hypothesis, and over the years, it's proven out relatively accurate, which is, every 18 to 24 months, computing densities double and chip sizes get smaller, more powerful, and so on. And there was a time in the recent past where that was stalling. It was stalling, and ultimately it comes down to thermodynamics. And so what were we going to do about that? How do we fix that? And there's this vision of quantum computing in the future, and that is certainly an option out in the future from a commercialization perspective. So how do you solve some of it? And so from my perspective, there's two parts of that. One is you don't necessarily need to go smaller, although we want to continue to do that for density purposes. But we're working on next generation technologies with companies like Intel, for example. We're working on wafer series where it's multiple hybrid systems where we have GPU application technologies with companies like NVIDIA, the A100 series of GPUs, and then we have CPU applications, which Intel is remarkable. They're just best in the world, in my opinion, and their acceleration technology. And then you've got storage all on a single wafer. And you're able to get denser and put, dual cores, and it just, so the idea that Moore's Law has stalled, that has been reinvigorated. We had an ape shit factor. I'm loving that. And we said, we've got to solve that problem, which is one of the reasons why TMG Core and companies like TMG Core exists, was how are we going to keep America, US interests at the table in the technology race, because it is a race, and we are behind in certain aspects of that, behind China primarily, and we should be very concerned about that. And we have solutions that we're working on. So from a Moore's Law perspective, it had stalled. It's been reinvigorated by companies like TMG Core, and we will continue to drive that, and not only drive that, but come up with new solutions and innovations that take that to the next level.
Thank you. Rupak, NASA does a lot of models and simulations on the data you're collecting. What is important to you when it comes to models and simulations?
Yeah, well, that's a good question also, and that's another interesting aspect of big data, for example, because many of the things that we are doing in terms of deep space exploration, or we are thinking about global weather modeling or sea level rise and all of that, many of these things you cannot also do it experimentally. You cannot just try it out. Many things we can, like we can build a rocket engine, or we can build a parachute and then try it out in a flight test, or maybe you can try a new wing design in a wind tunnel, and so you can do that. But even then, anything that you do in flight tests or wind tunnels, it's expensive, it takes time, and there's also limited amount of data that you can get out of those, because anytime you're going to put probes or sensors on that, you have essentially changed your experiment, because now you're putting thermocouples in there, or maybe you've put microphones in there, so it's no longer what you're going to actually have in the real thing. So therefore, modeling and simulation becomes very important, because it allows you essentially infinite flexibility. You can do anything you want. You can generate a lot of data, no issue with that. The problem is your models better be as close to reality as possible. Otherwise, you're going to use TMG Core's exaflop computer to generate exabytes of useless data. And it's very easy to do that. I can easily generate that. But the point is, so therefore, this modeling and simulation becomes extremely important. And then you also have to sometimes, oftentimes, check against it, right? You may have to do a wind tunnel experiment or a flight test to make sure that your models are good. And because it's numerics, and because there is finite resolution or accuracy or whatever you call it on digital systems, they're not really real. It's all a discretized version of reality, right? Because reality is continuous, but computers are by nature discrete. So therefore, you are having a discrete solution to a continuous problem. And so, yes, it is important. And I tell people all the time, during the Apollo era versus what we do now in terms of flight tests and experiments, we are down 3 orders of magnitude. And all of that has been replaced by these advanced supercomputers and all of that. And then finally, certain things you just cannot model. You cannot just raise the ocean temperature by 3 degrees, even though we might be doing that already because of our bad habits. But independent of that, you cannot change that and then see, okay, let's see what happens. You'll have to. The only way to do those things is through modeling and simulation. So that's absolutely critical for the kinds of things that NASA is interested in.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for this amazing hour I've got to spend with you. I feel like I'm 10 times wiser than I was before. Thank you so much. And I see David now on, so that's our cue that it's time to turn things back over to America's Future Series. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sam. Great job.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
David.
much.
Thanks.
You guys were brilliant.